Okay, so today we are going to first cover oral skills, oral practice, all right, over here. Oh, oops. So oral skills, and then we are going to do a bit of current affairs. We're going to talk about some topics, and hopefully you'll learn some extra information about it. All right, so today is actually the second last lesson for the holidays. Next week will be the last lesson for the school holidays. Following that, there won't be any more lessons from 88 Tuition until next year. So, after next week's last lesson, it will be bye-bye, Merry Christmas, and have a new year. Have a happy new year, okay? So, let's have a look. So, oral practice. So here's the assessment criteria for your spoken interaction. This is not your reading aloud, it's spoken interaction. It's the one where you have a conversation with your teacher, right? So you would be scoring in the band 5 mark range if you can offer well-considered responses with well-developed perspectives, which means that you are able to explain why you think the way you think in a detailed way, including being able to give examples to your teacher about why you have that point of view. Okay, so that's what we mean by well-considered responses with coherent and well-developed perspectives. Next, we are going to make sure that you need to make sure that you use a wide range of well-chosen vocabulary and structures. Structures meaning sentence structures. Yeah, so speak appropriate English, no Singlish, please. And you should have clear pronunciation. And lastly, you should be able to engage in a sustained discussion, sometimes moving beyond the prompts. So this would actually mean that you have an actual discussion with your teacher. Okay, it's not an interview. I think a lot of secondary school students approach their oral like it's an interview. Your examiner asks you a question or your teacher asks you a question, you answer. Then the other person asks you a question, you answer again. So the entire spoken interaction is just you answering questions from your teachers, right? So that is not interaction. That is called being interviewed, or that's like what police might do to criminals in the interrogation room. So that would be more like an interrogation. Okay, so if you want to score well for your spoken interaction, you have to have a discussion with your teacher, which means you should be asking your teacher questions as well. Okay, and it's okay to ask them questions because after all, it's a discussion. Yeah, a discussion is an exchange of information both ways, not just you providing information to your teacher, but your teacher providing information to you as well. Then we can call it a discussion. Yeah. Oh, here comes Lincoln. Okay. So keep that in mind. Yeah. So say, for example, you are given a stimulus, maybe a video, right? You watch a YouTube video on homeless people in Singapore, something like that. And then, your teacher's first question is, why do you think there are still homeless people living in Singapore? That kind of thing, right? And then you give your answers. You can say, I think that sometimes homelessness is a choice. Some people choose not to have a house because they want to be financially free. They don't want to owe the bank money because they have a house and they want to use their money however they like. And then you can also say that, and sometimes people just make really bad decisions and they lose their money because it's cheated off of them, or they made a foolish decision in the past and then now someone else has run off the money, so on and so forth. And that is why there are still homeless people in Singapore. But you can say, I think the homeless in Singapore are not having it as hard as the homeless in other countries, because after all, Singapore is a warm country and you don't need to go through winter, right? Because winter is very harsh for people who are homeless. and blah, 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 blah. So you're able to explain, you can give examples, okay? Like maybe you could say, oh, just the other day I was walking past Clementi McDonald's and I noticed that there was an old man who was sleeping on the seats inside McDonald's, and I thought it was rather odd. Shouldn't it be that a fast food restaurant is a place where people go in, buy their food, eat it, and then leave? So that man sleeping over there was odd, and it was then that I realized he was actually homeless, blah, 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 blah. And you explain. Then if you go beyond that, that's where you score in band 5, the 13 to 15 mark range. Okay, so this is where you actually ask your teacher a question and you say, oh, Mrs. Tan, okay, or Mr. Joel or whoever, okay, what do you think? Do you think that homelessness can be prevented in Singapore? That kind of thing. And then they will offer their responses as well. And then you have an actual discussion. That's why it's called a spoken interaction, not a spoken interview. Okay, so that's how you score well for your secondary school spoken interaction. Yeah. Then, of course, apart from band 5, we have band 4. Now, the main difference between band 5 and band 4 is that, of course, band 5, you can score higher marks. But look at this. In band 5, the descriptor says, well-considered responses. So you think clearly before you speak, and when you speak, you offer details and elaborations on why you think that way. All right, but in band 4, it says it offers some thoughtful responses only, and then, you know, the other responses you give might not be so thoughtful. It's just very general way of answering a question. All right. Band 5 says, uses a wide range of well-chosen vocabulary. Band 4 says uses a range only, not wide range. Uses a range of largely appropriate vocabulary. Okay, and then generally clear pronunciation means there are some pronunciation mistakes, whereas band 5 says clear pronunciation, not generally clear. And lastly, band 5 says you are able to sustain the discussion, even moving beyond the prompts, right? And asking your teacher questions, or even giving more information than the prompt actually required you to. But of course, the information has to be related to what the teacher asked you in the first place. Whereas for band 4, it says you just respond appropriately to the prompts, but you don't go beyond the prompts. You just answer within that question, and then you don't lead it off into another part of it. Yeah, like the example I gave you just now, right? If your teacher just asks you something like, why do you think there are so many homeless people in Singapore, that kind of thing, and you just answer that question, all right, you don't actually need to provide examples of how homeless people are living in other countries. You don't need to think about how homeless people survive winter, that kind of thing. But you provide that kind of information. That is you moving beyond the prompt and giving solid examples, and even thinking about maybe homelessness and how the government is actually trying to deal with it, and how maybe homelessness is something that no one can prevent, because no one can prevent everyone from making foolish mistakes. Yeah, the government can give you advice on how to avoid scams. Your your family members can give you good advice on why gambling is actually a bad idea and how it's so addictive, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, there are always people out there who get scammed, people out there who lose their money to gambling, so on and so forth, and in the end, they end up homeless. So it's something that can never be completely cured as long as people are vulnerable to being cheated or vulnerable to addiction. Yeah, so you can make that kind of, if you can give that kind of information and that kind of stance, right, that kind of perspective, you're looking at a band 5, basically. Then as we go down the range, we have band 3, 2, and 1, which I will not talk about too much. It basically means you do a banged up job of answering the questions and you can't really offer much responses beyond very simple ones. You could be saying something like, I think there are homeless people out there because they are poor, that kind of thing. and then you don't explain how they became poor in the first place, or you don't understand how, you don't explain how they lose their money in the first place, or perhaps how they ended up in that state. Yeah, was it because they got disowned by their family, or maybe some of their relatives were evil and conned them of their money or whatever. All right, so there are many reasons why people become homeless. All right, so if you just say something like, oh, they're homeless because they're poor, that kind of thing, it's not a very well thought out response. You're just answering the question, at a very surface level. You don't go deeper and ask yourself why down the road. You just answer the very basic why. Okay? So that's if you are scoring at like the band 3, 2, and 1 range. So how do we organize a well-developed response? Okay, so this is a structure. It's not the only structure for you to use when you respond in oral. This is a type of structure you can use, and it's called the PEL form. I believe you have heard of this in school. They use this in writing compositions as well as explaining your points during oral as well. So first, point, right? So point basically means your main idea. Where do you stand, right? That's what we mean by point. What is your perspective? Okay, what is your main idea basically? So introduce and state it, then explain it, right? Give some evidence if you can, research, give some examples you can think of, or personal experiences. Yeah, so that's explain. Okay, and then elaborate is explain the evidence and how it would help make your point in the context of a response. This sometimes is changed to example over here actually, if you want as well. Then you can cancel example up on top there. So basically explain what you mean with some details and then give an example of it. And lastly, link it back to what your teacher asked you in the first place, right? Link response to the question. So you can, at the end, you can say, therefore, I think that blah, 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 because that's what I said, so on and so forth. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say the topic is about saving the environment, right? which is a very common topic for secondary school, saving the environment. So point over here, you could be talking about, say, Singapore's nature reserves. Yeah. So here you could say, oh, I think that Singapore's nature reserves, right, are not enough. I think there should be more so that we can conserve the local flora and fauna in Singapore, which makes us unique. Then explain. All right. Although there are many nature reserves in Singapore, like Bukit Timah Nature Reserve and the Mandai Reserve, I think there are not enough nature reserves still, because Singapore is developing at a very fast pace and the government is building a lot of places to accommodate more people fluctuating into Singapore. And that is why I think it's important to set aside land currently to be reserves before they are all taken up by HDB housing or other building projects for condominiums and other types of housing. Okay, and then here you can give an example. All right, for example, in the past, the Punggol Nature Reserve used to be really, really huge and large, which allowed for people to do many leisure activities there, like going for bird watching or spotting animals, or even enjoying a day out with their family. Now, most of the Punggol area has been overtaken by HDB estates, and sadly, many of the local flora and fauna has been forced to evacuate that area to find other places to live. And this has caused some tensions between animals from the other places as well. As we all know, there are otters in Singapore, and the Punggol Nature Reserve otters are currently fighting the Mandai Reserve otters for dominance in their territory. So that's like an example you give. Then you link it back, right? Therefore, I think it's very important for Singapore to conserve more places for our wildlife and our nature so that we can continue enjoying what makes Singapore unique as a Southeast Asian country. That kind of thing. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's what I mean by point, explain, example, and then link. Okay, PEEL. So yeah, something for you to think about. And if you want, you can use this technique